Attention all officers, we have a stick-up in progress, Colfax and Uinta at the 24-hour arcade. Cars to cover.
32 and 34 were right next door. 34, what information do you have on it?
Party that we had on the phone just hung up. It's the 24-hour arcade, Colfax and Uinta.
Saw was Pat running in front of me, and I assumed that he was chasing the suspect. Apparently the suspect had turned through a fenced yard, and that's where Pat turned. I came through the back gate, and Pat was just going out the front gate. At about midpoint in the backyard, I heard 2 gunshots real quick, and then just a momentary pause, then 7 to 8 gunshots real fast after that.
Okay, all officers going code 10, 234 says shots fired. 234, calm down. Where are you?
Well, 1 officer down, 1 party down. There'll be 2 ambulances. 1500 block. Right behind, we're 1 block to the west of Uinta, Ulster.
Okay, that's good. 1500 block, Ulster. All officers, we have 1 officer shot, 1500 block, Ulster.
Yeah, I got this guy at baseline. I'm not going to push him. The gun's right next to him. So I need some cover here fast.
Hello, I'm Dan Saracino. That was me on the radio 20 years ago. Since then, many of you received training on this incident where Pat Pollock lost his life, and on foot pursuits in general. But back then, we didn't receive much training on foot pursuits, except for a few main things to remember. It was pretty much seat of the pants. A lot has changed in 20 years, but some things haven't.
Well, that's so true, Dan. I mean, now we have individual radios, high-intensity flashlights, helicopters with night vision. But what has not changed is how dangerous foot pursuits are, and the strong likelihood that somebody can be killed or injured while pursuing one of them. And that's why it's so important for all of us to be on the same page tactically, to know what each other is going to do. Foot pursuits are risky business. In a foot pursuit, the tactical balance swings more in favor of the suspect, and so you, the officer, are forced to walk a line between protecting the safety of the public and yourself and your duty to enforce the law and apprehend criminals. By following some of the tactical guidelines I'm going to discuss, we can take the tactical advantage back. Of course, the best and safest way to win a foot pursuit is to not let it happen in the first place. Some foot pursuits can't be prevented, like the guys who bail from a stolen car. But in some situations, there are a few basic things you can do to prevent a suspect from running in the first place. Look for warning signs. For instance, the suspect may start looking around for an escape route. He might do a target glance, either at your firearm or maybe at your feet, in preparation for knocking you off balance. Or you might notice him changing his foot position or even backing up slightly just before he runs. Another thing to consider when you're trying to prevent a person from running is the number of suspects. A solo officer contacting 3, 4, or more people just screams, "Run!" Having multiple officers makes it less likely that a suspect will try to run. There is a technique you can use to physically restrain your suspect to prevent him from running, and it's not necessarily intrusive.
Sir, it's going to be a few minutes. Want to have a seat on the curb here for me? Please put your palms down on the ground behind you flat. Put your feet out in front of you. Cross your ankles. Do not move, please.
If he's going to attempt to run from this position, you're going to know it. Also from this position, if the need arises to arrest him or physically restrain him, it's much easier to do from this position.
Sir, don't move, please. Bring your hands behind you. Put your palms together. Interlock your fingers. Stand up here for me, please.
Additional training on this restraint and handcuff technique will be coming along very shortly. Okay, so you tried all your prevention tactics, but your suspect ran from you anyway. Or you just pulled up and he saw you and took off. There are some risk factors to consider before you just take off running yourself. First, what is the nature of the crime? Did he run from a shoplifting and a security guard has his ID? Did he just buy dope from an undercover officer and took off running? Or did you just roll up on a street robbery or a man with a gun call? Do you know the area pretty well? Or are you in another part of the district you're not too familiar with? Or did you go on a follow-up in another district you've never worked? Does your radio work well? We are all aware of the problems with radio dead spots. Are you in or near a dead spot? What are the conditions? Is the footing bad? Are you on uneven or even hilly terrain? What is the visibility like? Is there a lot of car traffic? Are there hazards like abandoned buildings or construction sites? Are you working undercover and look just like the suspect you're chasing? All of these might make you want to consider using alternatives like a perimeter or an air or canine search. Yes, it's our duty to apprehend suspects, but we always need to do it as safely as possible. Okay, so now you're running. Remember, tactics and the legal reason for the pursuit, not emotion, should determine your actions. We shouldn't just chase after someone just because they're running. And there are a few do's and don'ts to remember to stay safe and keep the tactical advantage. The first thing you need to do is to get an initial broadcast with as much information as necessary to get enough cover started your way. And at the end of the pursuit, or if you lose sight of the suspect, give your location and last direction of the suspect. Try to get as much of this information as you can, but at the absolute least, your location and direction. Something important you need to know about radio procedures. It is not the policy of the Communications Bureau to automatically simulcast a foot pursuit across all channels. Dispatchers generally will patch channels if you're close to a district boundary, but it is not automatic. You, or preferably another officer or supervisor, so you can concentrate on what you're doing, might have to specifically request it. While you're running, scan the area for available cover and possible hazards. Also, look for items or evidence the suspect may have dropped or tossed. And don't forget to watch his hands. Fighter pilots have a saying, lose sight, lose the fight. And if you lose sight of the suspect, if he goes around a corner or into a building, for instance, you need to stop, scan the area, listen. You might hear a trail of dogs barking, the suspect hitting fences, or maybe a door slamming at the other end of the building. When you lose sight of a suspect in a foot chase, the tactical balance tips and an ambush becomes a very real possibility. There are two additional points I want to discuss. We've come out here to the scene of Dan's foot chase 20 years ago. Dan, has it changed much?
If it has, it hasn't changed much.
Why don't you walk us through it?
Well, it was the afternoon on December 12th. Pat was working car 232 and I was on car 234. We stopped at what was then Paisan's restaurant to have lunch. About halfway through our lunch, the call came out on a robbery in progress across the street, which then was a video bookstore on the south side, which was District 3. Pat and I immediately acknowledged the call and we both ran out the front door. As we ran out the front door, we could see the suspect and the victims running across Colfax, heading towards the corner over here. As we ran out of the business, I continued running up to the corner. Pat made a turn here and went through the parking lot to try to head off the suspect into the alley. We're standing now behind Paisan's restaurant. This is a mid-block alley that comes off of Uinta Street. At this point, I'd gone around the business and was running up the alley this direction. At about the time I was at this position, I looked down the alley and I could see Pat chasing somebody down the alley, the suspect. He was at this point probably 20 to 30 feet in front of me. This is the rear gate that the suspect and Pat ran through. Just as I approached the gate, it was starting to close. I pushed the gate open and I could see Pat was at the very beginning of the yard going out onto the front yard. That's the point when I heard the quick gunshots. I remember as I ran through the front yard, or through the backyard here, I could hear the gunshots and I could look at Pat and I could see his gun was still in his holster. I remember that because I still had mine in my hand from running down the alley, and I remember thinking at that point that I still had my gun in my hand. It probably wasn't safe for me to run that distance. We're now standing in the front yard where Pat Pollock was killed. This is the open gate. As Officer Pollock ran through the fence, we can only assume or take a guess because we don't know at this point. The suspect was standing on this side of the gate, on the left side of the gate, secluded a little bit farther back. As Pat ran through the gate, the suspect raised the gun and fired 7 to 8 times. I was still running through the front yard and heard the gunshots. I saw Officer Pollock fall into the snow, and I continued through the front gate. As we've been saying, one of the mistakes that was made here was Officer Pollock failed to stop and pie the corner and look out carefully, go through the fence. His mistake was bad, but mine was even worse. I'd already heard the gunshots and seen my partner fall into the snow, but I continued and ran through the front gate without even stopping for a moment. Luckily, the suspect who shot Pollock apparently wasn't aware that I was behind him, continued and ran out of the yard and began to run across the street. So my first encounter with the suspect is as he fled across the street after shooting Officer Pollock.
Dan, you bring up a couple really good points here, and we certainly don't want to talk in absolutes. But if there is any absolute in our line of work in regards to tactics, it's pieing these blind corners, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
And what we have here, of course, is the suspect ran around. If I understand it correctly, he basically button hooked and he set you guys up in an ambush.
Correct.
Okay. So, like I said earlier, the old fighter pilot saying, if we lose sight, we lose the fight. So in this case, when we lose sight of the suspect, one of the things we want to have, one of the mindsets we want to adopt then, is that we are then in effect going into an ambush, and we need to back off a little bit and carefully pie these corners as we come around them.
Right, definitely. And the problem I think both Pat and I have, as all officers did, is you get so tied up in the adrenaline of the situation and the chase, you forget the tactics that are going to save your life. Pat forgot them and I forgot them as well, and I can't speak about what could have happened, but who knows, if Pat would have looked around the corner, he may be alive today.
Well, you know, we're like Sidewinder missiles. I mean, when a suspect runs, we drop off the wing, missile tone and lock, we ignite, and we want to go get them. You know, we don't want to lose the foot chase. That's the mindset we have is, hey, there the guy is, I want to chase him down, I want to put the cuffs on him. I mean, that's ingrained into us as police officers.
Right.
And what we really need to do is just think during that rapidly evolving situation, hey, let's slow up here. I don't know where he's gone to. Hunker down, think about other alternatives, or if we are going to come around these corners, is to carefully, methodically pie them off.
One other element that we didn't realize at the time, and that you never think about in a foot chase, is the suspect ended up living at this house. So we were chasing this individual not knowing where he lived. I can only assume once he got into his front yard, he felt safe, and this was as far as he felt he could run. We'd pretty much cornered him into his own yard and didn't realize it, so he fought back. You never know that when you're chasing, where are they running to or where are they going to end up.
So what he was doing is just running to his own turf, so he was fighting you on his own ground.
Exactly.
Territory that he knew the intricacies of. He knew exactly where to set up on you guys.
Right.
Good. So the lesson to be learned here, and the lesson in these foot chases, is do not blindly run around these corners without stopping, slowing down, maximizing your distance from the threat, carefully pieing this thing off. That this would be a good place to have your weapon out and have it in that ready position.
Exactly.
Okay, Dan, one of the other great points you brought up is separating from your partner.
Right.
And certainly, once again, we don't want to speak in absolutes, but we are talking about tactics, and there are certainly advantages and disadvantages about separating from your partner. But I think you brought up a really good example here when you're pursuing the suspect and you did have somebody holding this corner, you could then literally run into a crossfire situation.
True, very true.
And in fact, we've had that happen not on this department, but we did have a tragic occurrence here in Colorado where a suspect did get between two officers, and the officer was firing at the suspect and hit his partner in
Right.
the situation. So that's something we want to certainly keep in the back of our mind and be thinking about that when we're pursuing these suspects in these foot pursuits.
Right, and I think it's difficult, of course, in a foot pursuit. You never know what your partner's thinking or what he's doing. But I think if all officers in the chase are constantly aware of that there's another partner with him or another officer with him, it's best to utilize his skills and what he's doing as well, rather than just running off and being on your own. If you can stay with him, stay with him. I think is the way to look at it.
And certainly it's changed since when you and I came on a job, and 2 officer cars were were basically the norm.
Right.
And you'd be working with the same partner all the time. You'd have that communication going and sort of a game plan put into place. But now with solo cars and a lot of these cross-border incidents coming along where your partner may be an officer from Littleton, Aurora, might be a sheriff's officer, or even an officer here on the Denver Police Department from another district, you've never met them. So it's important certainly to get out of that solo mindset and be thinking about communicating with that